The year is 2035, and you're gliding through Europe like a character in a sci-fi travel ad, except something feels wrong from the moment your shoes hit the pavement. You wake up in Paris, grab a croissant still warm from the oven, then shoot across the continent on a hyperloop that feels more spaceship than train. By lunchtime, you're twirling pasta in Rome. And by sunset, you're clinking a frosty beer in Berlin. On the surface, it's perfect, postcard perfect. The kind of beauty that makes Americans whisper, man, they really figured life out over here. But then, the silence hits you. The streets look clean, almost too clean, because they're empty. The cafes are packed, but not with energy, just retirees with silver hair and slow conversations. And when you finally wander into a souvenir shop, you realize the owner isn't Italian, French, German, or even European. He's part of a multinational chain, one that quietly bought half the block. Then you look closer. The ports? Foreign-owned. The power grid? Foreign-operated. Entire neighborhoods? Bought up like collectible toys. You're not walking through a modern superpower. You're strolling through the world's most expensive, beautifully preserved open-air museum. Back in 2008, Europe and the United States stood shoulder to shoulder. Economic twins, each flexing around the same size. In fact, Europe was slightly bigger. 2 giants, 2 engines, 2 centers of gravity. Fast forward to today, and one twin became a rocket ship, while the US blasted through the stratosphere past $27 trillion in economic output. Europe sputtered, stalled, and crawled to just over $17 trillion. The gap between them? About the size of Japan's entire economy. Let that visual settle into your mind. How does a continent with world-class hospitals, legendary universities, and centuries of cultural dominance fall behind so violently, so visibly, so irreversibly? Here's the secret. Nobody in Brussels wants to say out loud. It wasn't sabotage, it wasn't bad luck, it was self-inflicted. A slow-motion economic suicide, carried out in broad daylight. And over the next 30 minutes, we're going to open the body bag and examine the wounds. 6 fatal blows that drained the old world until it became a museum of what it used to be. From German factories falling dark, to Italian nurseries echoing emptiness, to regulations so suffocating they choke innovation before it takes its first breath. If you think this sounds dramatic, just wait until you see the math. Since 2008, America surged 87%. Europe crawled 13%. If this trend keeps moving at the same brutal speed, by 2050, the average European will be poorer than the average resident of Mississippi, currently the poorest state in the US. Yeah, let that sink in while your espresso cools. So before we even get to the bottom of the cup, let's talk about the first nail hammered into Europe's economic coffin. 1. The great de-industrialization. Germany's engine blows out. For decades, Germany wasn't just Europe's backbone, it was Europe's beating industrial heart. Cars, chemicals, machinery, engineering. Germany made the stuff that made the world go round. Their success was a cold, clever formula. Use American military power for safety. Use China's endless appetite to sell cars. And, most critically, use Russia's cheap gas to power everything. It was a masterclass in geopolitical arbitrage until the whole house of cards collapsed. When the Nord Stream pipelines blew, both physically and symbolically, Germany's industrial business model didn't just wobble. It died overnight. Look at BASF, the world's biggest chemical producer. These are the people who make the invisible ingredients of modern life. Your toothpaste, your phone case, your sneakers, your medicine. Their headquarters in Ludwigshafen is so massive it's practically its own city. And in 2024, they made a move that should have sent a lightning bolt of panic through Berlin. They shut down core production in Germany and packed their bags. Why? Because chemistry requires energy, and Germany made energy unaffordable. With Russian gas gone and a rushed, chaotic, politically driven transition to green power, electricity prices exploded. Running a factory became like trying to power a skyscraper on AA batteries. So BASF took $10 billion and built a mega site in Zhanjiang, China. Think about how insane that is. The country famous for environmental standards is now exporting its factories to a nation that burns coal like it's fueling a dragon, and BASF isn't the only one fleeing. By December 2024, German industrial output collapsed to levels not seen since the pandemic lockdowns. The manufacturing core of Europe? It's being hollowed out like a dying tree. But here's where the irony becomes almost comedic. Germany shut down its last nuclear plants in April 2023 in the middle of an energy crisis. They killed their cleanest, most reliable power source, and to keep the lights on, they fired up coal plants again. Not just any coal. Lignite, the dirtiest fossil fuel on Earth. Entire villages are being bulldozed to mine it. They shut down nuclear to save the environment, and replaced it with energy that produces more pollution per watt than almost anything on the planet. You couldn't script this level of policy self-destruction. But can't Europe just pivot to high tech like the US? Sure. If their tech sector hadn't been strangled by regulations so thick, they might as well be red tape straitjackets. We'll get there. For now, understand this. Europe got rich by making things, and the signs hanging on the factory doors are flipping from open to closed fast. 2, the demographic death spiral. The cribs are empty. If Germany's industrial collapse is a heart attack, this next problem is a cancer. Quiet, relentless, deadly. And for this one, we travel to Italy, a land of breathtaking views, legendary pasta, unforgettable wine, and absolutely no babies. In 2024, Italy hit a historic birth rate of 1.18 children per woman. To keep a population stable, you need 2.1. Anything below 1.5 is considered a national emergency. At 1.18, you're staring at a mathematical countdown to extinction. Imagine you're a 25-year-old Italian. Not the Vespa-riding, espresso-sipping stereotype. You're Matteo in the real Italy, the Italy that headlines don't show. You've graduated. You've done everything right. But the economy? Frozen. Hiring managers avoid hiring anyone. You fire off CVs, knock on doors, hustle. Nothing. Not because you're unqualified, but because the system has stopped moving. Quaint. Back in your childhood bedroom. Posters on the wall, squeaky bed, dinner at 8. Rent isn't high, it's absurd. One bedroom in Milan costs more than half the country earns. Escaping is mathematically impossible. Here's the twist. The Italian state expects you, Matteo, to bankroll an entire elderly generation. Europe's pension systems are pay-as-you-go, no vault. Your grandmother's pension this month comes straight from your paycheck. In the 1960s, 4 workers per retiree. By 2050, fewer than 2. 2 people supporting a third's life plus their own government debt, crushing taxes. What does Matteo do? He leaves, US, Australia, Switzerland, and this triggers Europe's death spiral. Young leave, tax base shrinks, taxes rise, more leave, cycle tightens. In 2024, Italy had fewer than 370,000 births, the lowest since 1861. Politics makes it worse. Older voters dominate. Any politician proposing pension cuts or immigration reform loses. So governments borrow and kick the can down the road. Germany de-industrializes, Italy depopulates, the system cracks. Europe isn't building the next Google or Nvidia. 3, the innovation vacuum. Name a European smartphone, gone. Search engine, silence. Social network, Mastodon? Technically yes, but niche. The economy is digital. Europe is a colony of the US Magnificent Seven. Apple, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Nvidia, Meta, Tesla, worth more than the stock markets of UK, Germany, France, Italy combined. Not talent, but regulation. America innovates, China replicates, Europe regulates. Brussels writes rulebooks for innovations not yet built. Mistral AI in France spends more time navigating GDPR, DMA, DSA than training AI. Fragmentation kills startups. Launching in one country is fine. Expand? New languages, lawyers, taxes, labor rules, death by 1,000 cuts. European startups rarely scale. When they do, Americans buy them. DeepMind, Google, Skype, Microsoft, Booking.com, US holding company. Europe grows the flowers. US harvests the garden. In 2008, Europe had 30% of the world's top 100 companies. Today, less than 14%. Industrial revolutions happen in San Francisco and Shenzhen. Europe watches. 4. Capital flight. Money has no patriotism. It cares about returns. Money abandons Europe like the Titanic. Americans invest. Europeans save. 58% of Americans own stock. Germany, 18%. Savings accounts pay 0.5%. European companies can't raise growth capital and countries can't grow. And that's where this section ends. European companies lack the deep pool of money to grow. Imagine you're in Berlin with a world-changing biotech idea. You need $100 million to build a factory. So you walk into a European bank, and they stare at you like you just asked to borrow the moon. They want collateral. They want guarantees. They want your soul. Then you go to the venture capital guys. They offer $5 million and ask for 40% of your company. So what do? You get on a plane and fly to New York, because that's what the smartest companies already did. ARM Holdings, the most important company you've never heard of, designs the architecture for almost every smartphone chip on Earth, a British crown jewel, a technological masterpiece. So when they decided to go public in 2023, did they choose the proud, historic London Stock Exchange? Nope. They ran straight to NASDAQ in New York, because even European companies don't want to be European companies anymore. Spotify? Swedish? Trades in New York? BioNTech, German, made the Pfizer vaccine, also trades on NASDAQ. Birkenstock, the sandal company from Germany, listed on the NYSE. It's a loop of slow-motion collapse. European investors see low returns, put their money into U.S. funds. European companies see no capital, move to the U.S. The U.S. grows faster, attracts even more money. Repeat, repeat, repeat. Here's the punchline. Even the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, the biggest pile of money in Europe, invests the majority of its equity portfolio in America. Europe is literally funding its own decline, shipping its savings to the U.S., fueling American innovation, and then buying the finished products back at a premium. It is, frankly, financial self-destruction on a continental scale. Look, I know this is heavy. Dying factories, no babies. And all the money is flying to Miami. If you're still with me during this cheerful analysis of European collapse, do me one favor. Destroy that like button. Unlike the European economy, it still works. And tell me this in the comments. If you had $100,000 to invest right now, are you putting it into the S&P 500, USA, or the DAX, Germany? Be honest. All right, deep breath. We still have 2 massive problems left. And the next one explains why your heating bill is higher than your rent. 5. The energy suicide. Green dreams, cold reality. Energy is the master resource. It is the currency of physics. If energy is cheap, life is comfortable. If energy is expensive, life is pain. Europe chose pain. For 20 years, they led the world in the green transition. And yes, they cut emissions. But the way they did it was economically suicidal. Here was the plan. 1. Shut down reliable nuclear plants. Germany and Belgium did this proudly. 2. Ban fracking, while America embraced it. 3. Build massive wind and solar without proper storage. 4. Rely on cheap Russian gas to fill the gaps when wind and sun failed. And the entire plan depended on one man being stable, peaceful, and predictable, Vladimir Putin. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the illusion died instantly. Energy prices in Europe exploded, 10 times higher than in the United States. While American factories enjoyed cheap shale gas, European factories were paying ransom prices for LNG shipped across the ocean, often from the U.S. itself. In 2023 and 2024, European industry paid 3 to 4 times more for electricity than factories in the US or China. You can't compete with that. It doesn't matter how efficient your workers are. If your electricity bill is triple your competitors, you lose. And it wasn't just factories. In the UK and Germany, energy poverty became a real term, people literally choosing between heating and eating. Europe's grid became unstable, a patchwork of chaos. Too much wind and solar with too little storage means prices go negative when it's windy. Prices skyrocket when the wind stops. No business can plan for that. No factory can survive that. Europe gambled everything on a vision of the future where everyone follows the rules, trade is peaceful, Russia is friendly. That world is gone. But the power plants are still closed. Meanwhile, China is building 2 new coal plants every single week. Europe is cutting its own throat to reduce global emissions by a fraction, while the rest of the world keeps burning like nothing changed. 6. The geopolitical freeloader, the end of the peace dividend. For 75 years, Europe has lived inside a protected bubble, a botanical garden bordered not by hedges, but by American aircraft carriers. After World War II, the arrangement was simple. The U.S. handled the hard power, and Europe focused on rebuilding society. Washington paid for the guns. Europe spent on butter. That deal allowed Europeans to live in a world where free healthcare, 6-week vacations, and generous pensions weren't luxuries. They were standard. And while NATO required member states to spend 2% of GDP on defense, almost nobody actually did. Germany's army became a running joke. Reports claimed soldiers practiced with broomsticks because there weren't enough rifles. But that world ended. War returned to Europe, and the continent suddenly realized the foundations of its security had rotted. Here's the alarming truth. In a real high-intensity conflict, Britain would run out of ammunition in 2 days. Germany wouldn't last much longer. Governments across Europe are scrambling to rearm. But every euro spent on tanks is a euro not spent on hospitals, schools, or pensions. Europe is discovering a brutal economic equation. Social democracy is expensive. Security is even more expensive. And now they must pay for both. With a stagnant economy, a shrinking workforce, and no major tech growth, the math looks unforgiving. In late 2024, the European Union panicked. They called in Mario Draghi, the man who once saved the euro, to diagnose the continent. His verdict was merciless. He echoed everything we've covered. Slow growth, declining productivity, dwindling demographics, collapsing competitiveness. He warned that without radical change, Europe faces a slow agony. His words. Draghi called for an $800 billion a year investment surge, the equivalent of 2 Marshall Plans every single year, just to catch up with the US and China. But here's the tragedy. To get that money, Europe needs unity. It needs shared debt. It needs fewer barriers. It needs to act like one superpower, not 27 small nations in a trench coat pretending to be one. But political will is dead. Germany refuses to underwrite Italy's debt. France won't compromise on farmers. Hungary is Hungary. So Europe faces 2 futures. Future A, the Renaissance. Europe makes the painful choices, cuts suffocating red tape, restarts nuclear power, rebuilds its industrial base, supports families, constructs a capital market that can rival New York. Hard? Yes. But it saves the continent. Future B, the museum. The path Europe is quietly sliding toward. A gorgeous retirement home for the world. Tourists flock in to marvel at the Colosseum and the Eiffel Tower. They stay in American-owned hotels, eat imported food, and are served by an underclass of immigrants while the native population quietly disappears. It won't collapse with an explosion. It will fade with a sigh. Trains a little slower, hospitals a little more crowded, taxes a little higher. Until one day, the party is simply over. There's a universal lesson here. Success is not permanent. Wealth is not guaranteed. Europe conquered continents, invented modern capitalism, and shaped global civilization. And in just 30 years of complacency, it squandered its lead. If it can happen to Europe, it can happen to anyone. I don't want Europe to fail. The world needs a strong Europe. But numbers don't care about feelings. And right now, the math is merciless. If this analysis felt uncomfortable, good. That means you're awake. Because if you want to understand why the US surged ahead while Europe stalled, you need the other half of the story, the American economic cheat code. And that video drops next. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and don't miss it, because the next recession won't wait for anyone.